All right. Welcome to session 5. Thank you for sticking it out. I'm thinking we're going to do one more. And what I'd like to do next week is invite, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 teens to join us for just a time to hang out, talk, and things like that. Learn from them a little bit. I haven't really told them much about what we've been talking about, but I did ask a few of them if they'd be willing to join the class for the last session, and I think they're going to do it, so we'll see. But I think it'll be valuable to hear from them and test out some of the things we've been talking about, so I'm excited about that. So today we're going to be hopefully talking about some much more practical things. And I want to leave it open for some time to ask some questions and things like that. But before we get too deep into it, I've asked Corey to read a quick passage from Deuteronomy chapter 6, 1 through 9. You'll probably recognize this, but I think it's a good passage to reflect on as we're thinking about young people. So, Corey, will you read Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 9?
Yes. Love the Lord your God. These are the commands, decrees, laws These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates.
Thanks, Corey.
Yep.
So, we've read another passage kind of like this. You'll probably remember from Joshua and Judges, just looking at kind of that generational language. You can kind of hear some of that Moses is telling the people that they need to listen to these instructions, and they need to teach it to their children and their children's children, and to write these words on their hearts. And it's a good reminder of what's most important, that these instructions are about how we can love the Lord with our heart and mind and strength, and that this is what's most important. And passing that idea on to our children, on to our grandchildren, is very important. But I also want to just point out a little part that we kind of maybe skip over, because we mostly just focus on the love the Lord your God part. But he mentions to teach them diligently and talk about these instructions when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And that you should put them on your hands and your foreheads, your door frames, and your gates. And I think it's a good reminder that, we need to be making this idea of loving the Lord a part of our everyday life. All sorts of different aspects of life, at home, when we're going about our day, in the morning, in the evening. There's many opportunities for us to pass on this instruction to love the Lord. And you have to assume that they're teaching them through their own example. And so we're reminded that just as we go about life, we should be looking for opportunities to pass on this idea, this instruction of loving the Lord with all of our hearts, and to imprint that idea on our hearts, and then be with young people so that they can see it. And I think that's the key. We need to be with young people so that they can learn these things from us, because they're watching and they're already learning a lot of things from us. One of the problems is they often learn some of the things we wish they didn't learn from us, not just from the world or whatever. They learn things from us too. So I think that's just a good reminder. I like how this is a very familial passage, and it's a reminder that wherever we are, we need to be looking for those ways to pass that along to young people. All right, I want to just kind of dive in. Last week we talked about kind of 3 ways that we can really help young people connect, and especially with the church. And we talked about belonging. Do our young people feel like they belong, like they have a place? How can we do that as a church at large? And how can we do that as individuals? Just whatever we're in charge of at church, or just being there, how can we make young people feel like they belong? The second one was accompaniment, which is how do we invite them along in what we do? We'll talk a little bit more about that today. And how do we join in with what they do? Jesus had his disciples accompany him, and they learned from him by watching and doing. I mean, that's discipleship, is that they accompanied him. So how do we, instead of kind of pushing our young people off into their own programs, which again is not always a bad thing. It can be good to do learning in groups of peers. But instead of doing that all the time, how can we also draw them into what we're doing and include them and allow them to accompany us and join into what they're doing as well? And then if we do that, this is discipleship 101, I think. When we allow them to accompany us, the next step is empowerment. And that's the third one. How do we give them the keys? How do we give them opportunities to serve and to lead? And so these are kind of just like guiding principles. But what I really want to encourage you all to start doing is to look for ways to do these 3 things with our young people. Every Sunday, if that was kind of like one of your top goals for being there, is to think, okay, how can I make one young person feel included today? How can I invite one young person into what I'm doing? How can I empower one young person, or multiple, I heard a story about a youth minister who their church had a vending machine, and he hated having to restock it and stuff. And so he put this one young man in charge of it who was he had potential, but he was unruly. And that teen who was given this empowerment to be in charge of this, like really completely changed through that, because he was given the keys, literally the keys to the vending machine. He was given some kind of sense of responsibility and purpose, and it gave him new direction. So belonging, accompaniment, and empowerment. These are 3 key things to keep our young people in church, and beyond that, to actually help them grow into mature, active adult Christians. And so that's kind of what we talked about last week. And today I want to talk a little bit even more practical about what we can do. So just a few opening questions, and I want to keep this kind of in the context of, we've been talking about some of the deep-rooted barriers between adults and young people, and between young people and the church. Things like we make each other anxious. If you remember from session one, young people make us nervous, and we make them nervous. We want them to grow up a certain way, and so we almost try to control them at times. And young people, they want to grow up, but they don't want to grow up to be miserable like they see us being miserable. So we make each other anxious, and that's a barrier. We talked about how we often marginalize young people. We talked about how we don't always successfully relate the gospel to their lives. Why should I go to church if it doesn't really relate to me? That's not a bad question. I wouldn't even say it's an immature question. It's just an honest question. Why should they come to church when they have all these other options? How does it relate? So it's our responsibility to show them why it's important. It's not their responsibility to notice it right away without learning these things. So, keeping in mind those barriers, I wanted to ask first, what practical barriers do you experience when it comes to connecting with young people? What are some just practical things that keep you feeling disconnected from them? And, feel free to speak personally or from personal experience. What are those practical barriers?
Well, sometimes when I don't know someone, it's hard to find common ground, like something in common. And usually when I have a peer or somebody I work with, we already have work in common, but so with teenagers, got to get down on their level kind of and see what's going on. Like you said, I had a really good example the other time, of one of the kids that's really into, what was it, Legos or something? Or he was making
YouTube.
videos. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's doing videos, and it's like that. If you had that information that what they liked ahead of time, it'd be so much easier. It's like
It would.
Yeah.
So I wanna stop for just a second because I was thinking about this and I didn't really include it, but I love that you said that, Jennifer, because it's so true. There's been one or two times whereby I've experienced this. I've shared a few things where people have come up to me and said, wouldn't it be nice if our teens did this, as a kind of a way to get to know them, but a quick, easy way. So I've heard once or twice, it would be great if once a month or whatever, or we had a bulletin board that had our teens on it and had information about them so we could see who they were and get to know them and stuff like that. And, on the surface, that sounds like a great idea, right? Give them a little pamphlet, we have directories where we can see people's faces and their names and stuff. But is there any other place in life where that's how we meet people? Think about that. Do we do we go at your jobs? When you arrive at your job, do you get a packet with, this is Corey and he's this age and he has these kids and this is what his hobbies are? We expect that for our young people at church, but we don't do that anywhere else in life that I can really think of.
Tinder.
Yeah, it's almost like we want some kind of dating app for teenagers to get to know them.
And
And
it's so easy to come across lame too. You don't want to come across lame right out of the gate.
yeah, and this is kind of pointing at, I think something that's really important, we'll get to later tonight, is a lot of times we have good intentions, but we're not willing to be authentic. Because it would be very easy for me to, it would not like to do it because it would take forever, but I could get a picture, I could type up a little bio about every teen and hand it to each one of you and say, go forth. But like, can you imagine, like, if someone came up to you that you've never seen before and they're like, hey, Jennifer, how's your softball league going?
I would be like,
Whoa,
exactly.
how do you know all this information about me?
Yeah.
That's creepy. So what a normal person would do, which a healthy, normal person, which I think you all are, is we would go up to someone and we say, hi, my name's Kyle. What's your name? And then you go from there, you know, and what do you like to do? And learn, like, we need to balance, like, not being overbearing, you know, but that's such a good point, is like, sometimes it's difficult to know what to do. And it's like, oh man, that youth minister, what does he do all day? Why doesn't he make us some kind of packet that we can make our jobs a little easier? Because I want you guys to go talk to them. That's really why, you know? But that's a great point. All right, that was a little rabbit trail we chased. But so what are some other practical barriers that makes you feel disconnected?
Things change so quickly in what they like. You could talk to them 5 minutes ago and they like one thing, and 5 minutes later it could be different. So that can be intimidating sometimes for, you know, if you think you're up to the no and then you're not.
Oh,
We'll
trust me,
never be up to the no.
I'm
Yeah,
very
we can-
familiar with that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we came across it all the time when we were in this room. Like, oh, you like this blah blah. I'm like, no, I don't anymore. I'm like,
That was
oh,
the last week.
okay. Yeah, that was just last week. Not anymore.
And I've learned that they're very gracious about that, you know, and they'll make fun of you a little bit and then they'll move on, you know.
I guess we started at 6:30.
There they are.
Hey,
He's not wanting anyone to perish.
Jim.
He wants everyone to come.
Kyle, a couple barriers that I
If you
can
come
think
to
of
Dr. Frank, you've
are
got to
being
come.
shy. You
Okay.
know, just
Yeah.
being too shy that you're an introvert and you don't like, you know, putting yourself out there at all for fear of whatever. But also if you don't have things in contact. So if you meet somebody and you're like, oh, do you like sports? No, I never really got into sports. I like theater. Oh, I mean, if you just keep going back and forth and you're not really hitting on anything. Well, do you have any pets? Yeah, I have a bird. Oh, I have a dog. Oh, I don't like dogs. You know, if it just,
Yeah.
that I would say would be a barrier, just to, you're trying to find something to, oh, well, we both are from, you know, Oregon, and do you go to the coast? Do you like to snow ski? Just anything like that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, if you strike out 4 or 5 times, just say, well, it looks like this isn't working out. I'm gonna go find a teenager.
What I find, it's like, okay, when I get to know people, usually it's because, like you said, Jennifer, you have something common to start with, or like in a group, you're in a group together or a class together that's small enough. Because like you talked last week, you can't really get to know people at the church building. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do I do this entry into meeting these kids that I don't know? Because just like you said, just going up to them at church, that seems kind of weird, and when I've never done it before. So I would like some sort of, if we could figure out some sort of entryway to get to know them that is more natural and comfortable. And I don't know if I'm making sense, but
Yeah. A good entry point into their lives.
yeah, like having
Natural.
a class or a life group together, or something
cream.
where you share yourself in a more natural way, like we're doing now.
We could have ice cream together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
have a picnic. But you know that the challenge of those things too, and when it's real social, is you hang out with the people you know.
Mhm.
You know, you don't want to push your way in. I don't anyway. And
Kyle,
So
Kyle, I'm sorry we were late. I got I was thinking you started at 7, and we're just getting in this. But I wanted to say a couple of Sundays ago, we were eating outside at a little restaurant, and some people came up, and I started asking them, are you from here? And no, they were from out of town, and a little bit of visiting. And then he said to us, tell me what we need to know about farming. What you would tell us what you would like us to know about farming. And I've thought about that question. You could do that in a whole lot of ways.
Yeah.
To a teenager, tell us what it's like to be 16 and have to whatever.
Yeah, that is a very good question. Why is that a good question, though? Why do you guys think
It's
that?
open-ended.
Yeah, it's open-ended for sure.
Well, and it asks you to tell me something about you, but it's not that personal. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's not super personal, especially if you say, tell me what it's like to be a 16-year-old. It's been a few years. And then it's not just about them, but it's about who they are. Why else, though? What are some other reasons why that is a very good question?
I think it shows respect for them, and it's empowering, I think,
Yes.
to say, hey, I want to know about you, about this thing that you know that I don't.
Yeah. So very, very respectful. What it does is you sit down and you elevate them. You please tell me I don't know. It's admitting that they know something that you don't.
Yeah.
And that's really huge to do for young people. And there's something else I was going to say, but Jennifer, go ahead. I can't remember.
For me, it's easy to forget that they look at adults as figures of authority, so then we're trying to come down to their level and show interest, and then there's kind of a barrier there unless they already know us.
Yeah. And, what is their view of authority even,
Because we're adults.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
One of the important lessons that we learned and tried to pass on in missions when we went to a foreign country was we would tell people, go needy. In other words, don't go and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Mhm.
And that needing help, needing someone to do something for you is a good way to empower them. And it starts a relationship, and it can. And so that, anyway, that reminds me of what we're talking about is.
Yeah. It's recognizing that they have something that you need. That's very huge in missions. A lot of times we go and we, like you were saying, I have what you need.
Yeah.
Let me give it to you. Well, that doesn't make people feel super great.
No.
The thing I was going to say, I just remembered, that asking that question, tell me what it's like to be a 16-year-old. Like, compare that to an older person having a conversation with some young people and just kind of making a remark like, oh man, I wouldn't want to be a teenager nowadays. It seems like you guys have, just a lot of tough stuff that you deal with. Like, do you see the nuance there? It's very different. We already know that that's true, that it's tough to be a teenager. We've discussed that, right? But saying that to them, it's basically, even though you may not mean it to be like a downer, it's basically saying like, wow, it really sucks to be young. Like, I'm glad that I'm old now, and good luck. So huge difference. That's a great question, Janine. And you can be late anytime. That's totally fine. You have permission. So, yeah, Stan.
Yeah, got a bulletin thing from somebody, and one of the things they said is from Solomon wrote down, God told him, don't tell people, wow, I remember the good old days, because like you're saying, that's just that demeaning, I think, Kyle, to say, oh, you guys are, you got it so bad. Is that what you're saying?
Oh
You
yeah,
got it. You're never going to, is this going to be the worst time in human history?
yeah,
That's got to be the worst thing to say to someone's growing up.
yeah. The good old days. I mean, that whole mentality it's never going to work because you're just implying that their time will never be as good as yours. You
Yeah,
know,
that's,
just demeaning. That's all. Yeah, Jennifer.
What about telling them what it was like when I was a kid at their
Yeah,
age? Is that okay?
I think so. I think,
Like, is
you
that
know,
like,
I think comparing and contrasting is great as long as it doesn't become that like who's better, you know. Remember that thing we talked about? I can't remember, it was 1 or 2 or 3 sessions ago now, but we talked about the meme that I see on Facebook all the time of like an 8-track player or a rotary telephone or something old on a tractor. Or for one that I actually knew was my first car was a '66 Oldsmobile Cutlass. Love that car. And it was an automatic. It had 2 pedals, and then on the left it had this little button that you could step on. Any old timers know what that button's used for?
isn't that the starter?
No.
Dim the lights or something like that.
Lights. It was like the bright
Oh, yeah.
system.
I drove one of those.
So it's like, and those Facebook posts are, they say something like, basically the gist is, if you know what this is, you're cool, and if you don't, you're an idiot. So I mean, comparing what it was like when you were younger, I think that can be a fun thing. In fact, another thing that I mentioned is I like to tell the teens that like when I was their age, I had to pay for text messages. And my parents found that out the hard way after my first month of having a phone, you know, and they almost don't believe me that you used to have to pay for text messages, and you could have free calling on nights and weekends. That's like crazy, and it's just fun. It's funny to think how different that is. So I think that's a great way to connect, is just kind of sharing your life, what it was like and what it's like now, and those kind of things. So we talked about a lot of. Oh yeah, go ahead.
One more barrier that I can think of that's kind of big is the teens go to class upstairs, but then they don't always go to service. And that's where you would normally meet, I guess, and talk to people would be after services.
Yeah.
But isn't that true? Quite a few of them don't go to services. They just go to the class.
That's another thing is, you'll see a handful of our teens on Sunday morning, especially right now, right? A little different situation, but there's at least another whole half that their lives are not centered around Sunday morning. And they come to Wednesday night and they go to camp, but their parents don't go to church. And they rarely will go to Sunday morning. And I mean, it's a whole another side issue. I have my own philosophy on that. I really don't egg kids on really hard to get them, to get their butts in the pews on Sunday morning. That's just another topic, but that goes to show that sometimes you have to go to them. You're not going to see them on Sunday morning. The team that you might connect best with might come on Wednesday nights or whatever, and it's going to be harder to connect with them for sure. And so that's where it's like my job to find those ways to get that team more connected. So that's a good one, Corey. All right. So I want to start shifting to, how does this really work? And I think the best way to do that is just think about our own lives. And I don't want to spend too long on this because it would be a good conversation, but it would probably take up the whole time. So maybe just a couple people could share. I want you to think about who was a person in your life who mentored you in your faith, and what specifically did they do to make an impact in your life? And maybe if like 2 or 3 people wanted to share. Who is a person in your life that made an impact to you in your faith? They mentored you, and what specifically, like, do you recall about that person? What did they do to make an impact? Who wants to share?
I'll start. It's pretty easy for me. Your grandpa, Jim Williams, pretty much raised my dad. He was the preacher over in Prineville when my dad was growing up, and kind of took my dad under his wings and married my parents. And then they came over here to Newburgh, and they just lived around the corner from my parents. Your grandpa was the preacher, but also / youth minister for, part of my growing up years. And like, he was just always around. He would come over and play cards with my dad and Bill Killen and Don Har. Would joke all the time. I think, being able to joke and poke fun at people is part of it, as long as it's good joking. But he was also there. I spilled oil when I was a kid. My brother had broken his wrists, and my parents were at the hospital. My dad had a container of oil in front of the freezer, and I went out there and opened the door. Oil spilled all out, and I didn't call my parents. I called Jim. I said, "Jim, I'm dead meat." So he came over and helped me with kitty litter. He helped me clean it all up. So just having a relationship, where you're close enough to call people if you need help. But also, he baptized me. He married me. He married my parents. He married my wife's parents. So, we have a lot of relationship with your grandfather and your family. So
That's cool. And what I want you guys to see is just some of the things that stand out. The kind of person you ask to baptize you or to marry you, officiate your wedding, those are the people that have done something, being there when it mattered most, sharing all those little life things, Yeah. Who else? Yeah, Nicole.
Well, I didn't have anybody to mentor me or like kind of guide me in a spiritual direction when I was young.
Sure.
So can I talk about somebody when I was older?
Yes.
Okay, Lorinda. Lorinda was my mentor at the shelter. And to be honest with you, she taught me a lot like about myself. Like when I met her, she was like kind of like, I can't really like describe it, but she was like the type of person that I kind of like thought I was, or who I like knew that I wanted to be. She was really sweet and really like positive, and she just kind of like helped bring those things out in me that kind of like were dormant, because I didn't have anybody when I was young. So just having her there for me, and she's still there for me all the time, really has made a big difference in my life. And even as an adult, and not having that person as like not having a mentor when you're young and then having one when you're older, honestly, it's a different kind of impact. I think it's pretty powerful.
That's cool. That's pretty awesome. And look at you both here. That's great.
Yep. And now we both volunteer at the shelter too, together.
Yeah. So, accompaniment, and now you're doing what she was doing. It's cool. One other person?
Well, I'll go ahead and go here.
All right, Stan.
So I was raised Catholic. God bless Catholics here, folks. But we had, in the Catholic faith, we have people they call, I guess our church would call them deaconesses, but the Catholic Church calls them nuns. So I had Sisters of St. Joseph for 9 years teaching me in just their whole demeanor of serving and watching them as women. For some reason, I've always been attracted to women, which is a good thing. But I've always liked listening to women's prayers, and even when we were joined the Church of Christ, always liked to be around the women because they're so sweet and not so trying. For some reason, I just see men as too macho, the know-it-alls. I found out, and that's always so. For some reason, I've always like my mother. She raised me because dads were really working a lot. So I just think women are just great.
Thanks, Dan. I like to think about like Sean and Nancy for Rebecca and I were very impactful. I was a camp counselor for Sean when I was like early high school, and I was a kind of a punk. Like, even though I was a church kid and I knew how to act the right way at the right time, I wasn't on a great track long term, and he took me under his wing. He beat me up a bit the first year, in a good way. And by like the second or third year, like, he said something that I'll probably never forget. And he told me, like, one day you're going to run this camp, which didn't actually happen. Unfortunately, I had to take over a different camp. So that's his loss. But, that was that empowerment. And since then, I've lived in their house a couple times, like 2 or 3 times, I don't know. They've been there for us every turn. Sean officiated at our wedding, and so we have those people in our lives, and so I think, like, sometimes we think about, like, we get so caught up in like the barriers and like, oh man, how do I even get started? We have to maybe just think back, like, what did so and so do? Like, what did they do with me? And maybe, like, now as an adult, you can see all the investment and all the sacrifice, and so, like, what did they do? Let's start there. Maybe, most of these people made an impact in our lives because they shared their lives with us. So let's get practical. George Fox has this cool saying. It's be known. It's like one of their mission statements in the schools. They want all of their students to be known, to feel like they are known by the faculty, by the staff, by each other. And that word known can mean a lot of things. So I want to talk about a few different things that we really need to do. And these are, to me, they're not just like principles, they're actual, like, practical applicational things we need to do. So it might sound a little bit like principles, but these are, like, in my mind, specific things we need to do. And the first one is we need to be present with them. And I like to think of being present in 2 ways. One is seeing them, and the other is hearing them. So how do we be present with young people? I mean, first off, we have to be around them. We have to be available. We have to pursue them. And we have to find those opportunities to do that. I think there are quite a few.
You going this way?
I'm going to mute Stan because he's driving. He's going to get in a car accident. There's lots of opportunities to do that. Sunday morning, I think, is an easy one, and you should definitely pursue that. Joining class would be a great one. Trying to find ways to outside of the Sunday morning church to connect with young people. It might even help to start with the ones that you might feel like you have the best relationship with, or some kind of connection. Maybe you co-led VBS together, or you know their parents really well, or something like that, you know. So we have to be present, and we have to see them. And this means seeing them for the individuals they are, and not the way that culture tells them to be or that we want them to be, but to see them for who they really are. I think about like the way the Bible describes Jesus seeing people. There's a lot of different references to where like Jesus saw her, like he saw a woman who had just lost her son, and he saw her and he felt compassion for her. You know, when we see these kids and we really start to connect with them, that's where we begin to develop more compassion for them. So we need to recognize, acknowledge, and not judge. Seeing means we have to put our judgments aside. And then hearing, you know, I think about like we don't really remember many sermons. We hear a lot of sermons, but we don't remember much of it. But we do remember words that are impactful. We remember times where we really heard someone, or we really felt heard by them, you know. And this means giving them our full attention, you know, and truly wanting to get to know them. Again, these aren't just principles, they're practical things. And it's about investing and listening, really listening to them and getting to know them. And it's going to be hard. This is where learning to ask good questions, like Janine mentioned, it honestly just takes practice, because we know how teenagers can be. You ask them a question, you get the one word answer. You know, it's not, it doesn't, it's not always a dialogue. Sometimes it's almost like mining for gold. You know, you're cracking away. Hi, Joel. You're cracking away and you're just hitting rock and rock and rock. And then you find a vein. You ask the right question and boom, it just spreads, you know.
That
Sometimes,
happens to me all the time. I'll be sitting there quiet and then you hit the right thing and then I'm just like,
yeah, it's like, again, with Elliot with YouTube, you know. And again, that's where, you know, the basic get to know you questions can sometimes help you find those veins. But, you know, it's also recognizing that even the one word answers, like, we're valuing that, you know, we're really being present with them. And again, that starts by being around them. You know, so many people, they want us to have a thriving youth ministry, but they may not even be willing to even be around teens for an hour. You know, it's not always fun, I know, but we have to be present, be around them, see them, and hear them. I believe that when we spend time with young people, it will develop compassion in us. You know, I think compassion really is like almost a skill set, or I don't know if there's a better way to describe that. Compassion is something that needs to be grown within us. There are definitely some people who are more compassionate than others, I guess. It's almost like a natural disposition, but everyone has the capacity to grow compassion within them. And I really do believe that when we spend time with young people and we recognize that life is difficult for them in a lot of ways, it develops compassion within us. And so the next big one that we need to do is to be moved by compassion, moved to compassion. I mean, when we're truly present and we see the pain young people carry, we have two options. We have judgment or compassion. A lot of times when we learn more about young people, our natural reaction is to cast little judgments. You know, you see what a young person's wearing or what they're talking about, or you see what young people are doing on TV, and we make snap judgments. You know, when we gather more information, we have those choices. And we need to learn more and more. We need to train ourselves to not make the judgments and instead to be moved to compassion, to act on their behalf. And so this is where this compassion is a complete change of attitude to where we're favoring and extending kindness towards them. And it's not pity either. I think we need to recognize the difference. It's not that we pity young people, it's that we want to join in their experience with them, to make it better, to improve their lives, to invest in them. So compassion, it's also not just a feeling, it moves us to action. And when we learn more about them by being present and we develop more compassion, it's going to cause us to act on their behalf. One other practical thing that I think about is learning how we can give them a voice. How can we, since we're adults and we're accepted by the community, how can we learn to give them a voice and kind of become an advocate for them? And the only way we can do that is by first giving them our ear, by listening, right? And then as we develop that compassion, we magnify their voice. We become their voice, because they've got good things to say and good ideas, and we can learn to give them a voice through us. The next one is just sharing life, and it's this idea of like mutuality. So a lot of times we approach young people as if they have a lot to learn from us, but we also need to consider ways in which we can learn from them. And so when we share life together, it's kind of like a two-way street. It's going to start with you. You will find ways to invite them into your life. And that's that accompaniment thing. And eventually, once you have earned their trust, they will invite you into their life. And, that's where the door really starts to get opened. They might invite you to one of their baseball games or something. They might call you when they spill oil all over their garage instead of calling their parents. They're inviting you into their life, those kind of things. Sharing your life. Just thought I'd kind of open it up. What are some examples of ways that we can share our lives with young people, or allow them to share their lives with us? Yeah, Nicole. Oh, you're muted. Yeah, there you go.
I'm sorry. Like inviting them to do things like with us. You know what I mean? Like something that just popped in my head. Like, of course, something that I'm involved in all the time is the shelter. Like, sometimes there's projects and things like that need to be done. That could be something that you could do, like just invite a team, like, hey, I'm doing the project with this, I'm working with this. Is that something you might be interested in helping with, or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
And I think it would be a good way to find out more of what they're interested in as well.
I grabbed your drawing.
Hey, Joel. Hi, Joel.
I did your drawing
Good job,
that
Joel.
you just did.
He drew a picture of mom.
Oh,
It's on his little drawing pad. You can't really see it.
yeah. Nice job.
He wrote mom, and I have eyelashes and hair.
Oh, great.
Thank you, Joel. That's beautiful. Good job.
Joel and the two.
Stan, do you have one?
Stan, is that what you said, Kyle?
Yeah. Do you have?
You know what I was thinking is Jesus went to where people are. He didn't, of course, they came to him too, but I was wondering, is it something better that we can work with the team showing up on Wednesday night since the kids are there rather than expecting to see them on Sunday? Is it better for some adults to help you out on Wednesday nights?
Yeah, I
Would
mean,
that be helpful?
sometimes there's definitely something to, going to where they are, for sure. Sometimes though, we need to be careful about overextending our reach. We also need to be invited into their space. So the only thing, like I always say, that adults are welcome to come to our class. The only thing that I'm like hesitant on is that is like their space. And again, this is an area where I think it's good to have some separation. They have their space. They belong there. So we need to make sure that we are invited into their space. And that will come with time, but normally we do the inviting first. But I do think there are ways in which we can go to them and make ourselves available. Any other ideas about how you would potentially invite a young person to, kind of share in your life? Yeah, Jennifer.
Well, I've got two 16-year-olds, one on each side of me, and I've reached out to both of them to help me with Zane because I need somebody to help me when I work, and so since October, I've gotten to know both of them way better than I ever did before I got my dog. So I'm really thankful for that. And then like this class is kind of helping me to keep the conversation going, because sometimes I get stuck. But and then with Gabby, before I got Zane, we started doing beginner painting. I invited her to come over and do that, and just activities,
Yeah.
and so it's kind of trying to be creative and think of something fun, but if you can find something they're interested in, it makes it easier.
Yeah, for sure. Those are good examples. Sometimes, like, again, asking for their help. That's an empowering thing. When you ask for someone else's help, you're putting yourself below them, not in a bad way, but you're saying, I need you.
I value them. Yeah.
I believe you could do this job, that I need help with. That's a good thing. Janine, did you have one?
Well, I'm not very creative, but I like ice cream, so I'm thinking maybe we could take him for ice cream.
Yeah.
That's a start.
Sure, for sure. It really is.
I also just ordered a book, and I haven't gotten. I've just read the preface so far, but it's questions or ideas on things you can say to connect with. It's what questions for grandparents to ask their grandchildren is kind of the title of the book, but it would work. As I'm reading the preface, they're also designed for get acquainted questions too.
Yeah.
And so since I'm hoping to find some good questions in there to kind of keep on hand.
I like that. If you need good questions, call Janine.
I'll read you a paragraph.
Yeah. You could be hanging out with a teen, and if the conversation starts to lull, just excuse yourself to the bathroom, call Janine real fast. Get a few good ones, Yeah. Cool. Well, this kind of leads us to the last thing. And, again, this is just all about developing relationship, right? And one of the things that you kind of just need to do is make good memories. I think about this in youth group a lot. Sometimes it's not having a perfect program or a perfect devotional. Like, if I could just teach these kids to understand the Trinity or the theology of baptism or whatever, Sometimes it's not about having the perfect event or the right words. Sometimes we just need to make good memories together because they will remember that, you know. And it's the good memories that really is like the glue of the relationship, you know. And as those good memories start adding up, they're going to give more and more weight to your investment in them. So finding ways to make good memories is really great, you know, because once those good memories add up, that's where, you know, like Corey was describing, that's where you're going to get that phone call maybe someday where they are in trouble or they need something, you know, and or they just have a big question and boom, you know, all of that hard work and investment is paying off, you know. And I think it really a lot of times when I'm doing youth ministry stuff, I just think about, you know, of course I take time to think about devotionals and worship and all that stuff, but a lot of times I think what's going to make a really good memory so that 10 years from now they're going to remember this weekend and it's going to be a positive memory associated with Jesus, associated with the church, and associated with these other adults and peers that were out there, you know. Good memories are good. Yeah, Jennifer.
I can kind of remember taking an inventory when I was trying to figure things out. You know, you go through these stages in your life and evaluating the people that had been kind to me as opposed to just other people, you know, and it always pointed to the church, you know, and it's like, so all these things that we do, we're planting seeds and, you know, you just don't know how it's going to affect people.
Yeah. I like to think, you know, a good example is probably at least a couple times a year, we've had people come through our building, whether they went to church or they were just kind of coming through, they needed help with something. And they'll tell us, I remember coming here for the Joy Bus ministry, you know, and it's like, that was in like the 80s, right? And they remember all the way back to that event. And when, you know, 40 years later, when they're grown and maybe they've made some bad decisions in their life or whatever, and they're thinking, man, you know, what do I do next? Well, you know, there's those people at that church and they were really nice. You know, they formed good memories there. And so it did something later on, you know. And I think that's really one of the keys to that ongoing relationship. Oops. Okay. A few last things. So these are just some practical things. What I want you guys to think about is this idea of getting to know young people with the goal of like becoming their advocate, becoming like a lightning rod for them, someone who will stand up for them, someone who will do that because they know them and they have compassion for them. And they're seeking to share life and form a relationship with them. So here are the things that you need to do. They're not necessarily in order, but these again are some just more practical things. And I want to say, I've really been avoiding like a step-by-step approach. You know, I've really been trying to avoid like giving you super specific examples because I don't want like, you know, 7 adults coming up to our teens asking the same 7 questions and doing the same things. Like, I don't want a systematic approach, you know, but I do want to give you practical things. So the very first thing that you should do, like moving forward, and I can help with this, but I'm not going to give you a pamphlet or a directory, but you need to know their names. That's about the easiest thing that you could do. Obviously, that's harder for some. And, you know, a lot of people tell me they're not a names person. That's just because they're lazy, honestly. You know, I'm not a science person, but I passed my science tests because I studied. You guys probably remember Larry Albright, right? He would walk around with a notebook, and when he met new people, he would write their name in a notebook. I mean, he was doing his homework, you know. So know their names, get to know who they are, and it's not it. You know, it really isn't that weird just to say like, you know, hey, I'm trying to get to know some new people. I'm Jennifer. What's your name? I really want to get to know more people in our church, especially young people, you know, and, you know, just find ways to introduce yourself. It doesn't even have to be a long conversation. And if you want to, I wouldn't do it right in front of them, you know, writing it down, staring at them like, oh yeah, tell me more, you know. But, you know, write down their name and then next week practice it. Like, okay, that's Violet, that's Sonia, that's Michaela. Know their names. Um, and this is something we teach at camp. You know, we force the kids to wear name tags, and we teach our counselors to kind of like, you know, obviously you're getting to know these kids and you have some kind of relationship, because again, it's weird if you show up and you automatically know all this information about someone. That's going to be kind of off-putting. But we teach them to see a camper who's maybe in their small group, and to, if they forget, like look at their name tag from afar and then go up to them and say, hey David, how's it going? And look them right in the eye. Don't look down. Okay, David, hey David, how's it going? You know, do that homework and then go and look them right in the eye and call them by their names. It gives you a lot of credit. That's a Sean Jones move, by the way. So know their names. Also, you got to make the first move. Don't expect these teenagers to come get to know you. I've tried, doesn't work. You know, it's because they have anxiety, right? And it's our responsibility. The Bible's clear on that. It is our responsibility to seek them out. And you have to be patient with that. It's probably going to take multiple tries to really start connecting. It's going to feel forced sometimes and awkward, but get used to it. It's how I feel a lot of the time. The third one is you should connect with the parents. This is important for a couple reasons. One, if parents know that you're trying to get to know their kid, they're going to help you, right? Because they're probably already overwhelmed, you know, with kids, especially if they have like 4 of them, you know. But it's also important because a parent is probably going to be protective of their kid, and if an adult starts, you know, paying special attention to their kid and you haven't gone and talked to them and say, hey, I'm really trying to get to know more young people. Like, I'd love to be kind of a mentor. You know, can I have some conversation? Can I spend some time? You know, could we have your kid over for dinner sometime? You know, connect with the parents so that they know that you're intentional about this, and so that they can help monitor that, because some parents are going to have different ideas about what's okay. You know, some might say, oh yeah, take them anytime. Others will be like, let's make a plan. Let's structure this a little more. And again, we've talked about this. Invite them in. Ask for their help, ask for common interests, and do this later on. You know, I wouldn't lead with, hey, would you like to come watch my dog this weekend? You know, I'd start with, hey, what's your name? And get to know you a little bit, and then start inviting them in more and more. Because again, they don't want to feel used. They want, you know, we help people because we have a relationship with them, you know. Okay. This is a little more of a principle, but I think it is kind of practical. We have to allow ourselves to embrace this truth. You do not have to be relevant. You just have to be reliable. You don't have to know all the cool recent trends on TikTok. You don't have to know, you know, what kind of music they listen to. They don't expect that from you, you know. because we're old. They want you to be reliable and authentic, just like anyone else, so you don't feel like, oh man, I don't understand kids these days. I don't know who Justin Bieber is, stuff like that. It's okay. Next one is look for ways to point them to the things that are spiritual. So again, this is something that comes later, but be intentional in that you're not only like wanting to build some kind of friendship with a young person, you're also trying to point them to things of God. And this is where I think there are some crucial differences. I would say focus on who God is and don't make common enemies with them. So a lot of time what I see older people doing is like the easy way to make a friend is to make a common enemy, So like talking about how bad the world is and things like that, like that's going to be more of a turnoff to them because remember, they are way more tolerant than you are. We have to remember that about Gen Z. But there are ways to point them to things that are spiritual that don't have to make common enemies, and most of that should come through you sharing your own life and your own story. Talk about things that were spiritually significant to you. Talk about your time at summer camp or in youth group when you were younger, or other things that you enjoyed doing and how those were powerful, positive spiritual moments. And I would say avoid making those common enemies. And I'm not saying, we shouldn't like try to steer them away from things that we know are bad or harmful to them. But again, it's real tempting to just go make common enemy. Think about like sports, right? Ducks and beavers. Oh, you're a Ducks fan? I'm a beaver, and it's real easy to say, oh yeah, we're beavers, we hate those ducks, right? It's that kind of idea. Next one is just really avoid being fake. They can see right through it. They really can. They know when you're not being authentic. Be honest, be vulnerable, be willing to admit your mistakes. Kind of going along with the last one, and just learning to ask better questions as you start getting into deeper things, and instead of being fake or dishonest, learn or being overly harsh, learn to ask better questions. Like you might disagree with them on something, and learn to ask like, I'm not sure I see it that way, can you help me understand what you mean? Again, a very different response than like, oh well, I don't think that you're right on that. Very different response, asking them to explain something to you. And then the last one, this is something that I hope I've been able to instill in you a bit, but something we should all keep working on, is learn to just fight for them. Be their voice. You'll win them over when they see that you are authentically trying to give them a voice, trying to give them a place at the table. Those kind of things. Learn to fight for them and to be their advocate. That's what a good advocate does, is they stand up for someone who may not be willing or able to stand up for themselves. And especially doing that in our church context, because that's where it matters most. That's where we need them the most, is to learning to be a good advocate and to fight for them. And you can even ask them those kind of things like, how could a good way to ask this, like, how could I give you a voice? How could I, be there for you? Those kind of things, just asking them like, how could I help you feel more included here? How those kind of things. Okay. So, where do we go from here? I mean, I hope that I've kind of given you enough to at least get started out. And I think what we really need to remember is like this takes practice. Um, and you might it can sting to get rejected by a teenager for sure. Um, it's funny that in some ways we really belittle them, but at the same time we are too afraid to be rejected by them to even start those conversations. But know that you have me as a resource. I'm willing to help, and it just starts by the small things. Getting to know them, know their name, and start inviting them in, and see where it leads. You're not always going to connect super well with every single teen. I mean, I don't. Some teens I click with more, and the others I don't necessarily, but others do. You know, but what I want to do next week is invite some of the teens just to come and share a little about themselves, and honestly, kind of use it as like a laboratory to just allow you guys to ask questions that in a normal environment may not work very well. But since they know what to expect here, that they might be asked some questions and they have to do some thinking. They might be willing to answer some questions that you wouldn't be able to get away with. So what I want you to think about for next week is what questions would you want to ask a young person? And what I want you to do, um, because again, I am their advocate, so I want you to email them to me. I'll try to remind you, but think about what kind of questions you want to ask them. It could literally be anything. Who's Justin Bieber? If you want to ask them who Justin Bieber is, you can, but I wouldn't because he's so last year. But think about what kind of questions you'd want to ask a young person. Email them to me and be ready. Be ready for a few questions to ask them and just to get to know them. And then maybe also think about what would you like to learn or hear from them. So what questions would you like to ask them? And then what kind of things would you like to learn or hear about from them? Send me those. And again, just an opportunity for me to filter a little bit and make sure we're asking good questions. So don't feel offended if I'm like, well, let's not ask that, but how about this? Okay. And hopefully it'll just be a good time hanging out and getting to know them. And if you want to literally ask them like something like, hey, teenagers kind of scare me. What's the best way for me to like come and talk to a teenager? Because I don't know what to do, but I really, really want to get to know you guys. And they'll tell you. So if you want to literally even ask that question, go for it. So how's that sound? Does that sound like a grand old time?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's what I'm thinking. And then I don't know if we'll have a session 7. We'll find out. If we really needed to, if we wanted to talk more about something, we could. But other than that, I'll kick the teens out a little early and then give you guys marching orders. Cool. All right. Anything else? If not, my wife
No.
should be getting home pretty soon from a little vacation. I haven't seen her in a week, so it'll be good to see her.
Yeah, Kyle,
Oh yeah,
is it worth asking a teenager what their plans are when they get out of school?
yeah, it's not bad, but realize they may not know, and that might cause them some anxiety. But it's not necessarily a bad question. Again, a lot of it is like learning slightly better ways to ask questions. You might not get anywhere with that, but you might ask them like, what would you love to do for work someday? Like what's your dream career? And they may not ever do that, but they'd be excited to talk about that, you know. But yeah, the realize, especially for juniors and seniors, talk about college. They're probably excited about it, but they're also probably terrified because they have about 10,000 things to do before they graduate, and they may not even know where they're going to college or what they want to do with their life. And instead of that being a problem, that could be a great opportunity for you to say, hey, would you like to talk about that? You know, I'd love to hear more about what you're interested in. And I may not have any answers, but it'd be fun just to talk about what you'd like to do as you grow up and get older, you know. So
Okay, thank you.
cool. All right, you guys, I'm very appreciative of you all. I think it's really cool that you guys want to get to know young people. So thanks for doing that. Thanks for being here. We'll see you.